digital services, and we are going to have a conversation with Tovit and Carl. You've seen them. Those of you that were in the track 1 room would have seen them already, and they're going to return. And then we're going to come back for a fireside chat around designing with empathy, which really brings us all the way full circle back to the human factor in the digital transformation and AI evolution. Let me welcome to the stage Tovit and Carl. Give them a hand.
Hello again. I'll introduce myself briefly for those who were not here before. I'm Tovit Neiser, a business storyteller. I help executives and organizations communicate their story internally and externally. And with me, Carl Martinu. And please introduce yourself for those who did not attend the previous two previous.
Thank you, Tovit. Again, thank you very much, everyone, for this invite to this great conference today. I'm a Chief Information and Privacy Officer. I formerly worked for Legal Aid Ontario for approximately 20 years, 12 years as CIO. With it, it was a great honor to be working in Crown Corporation Public Sector. And in 2023, I left Legal Aid Ontario and I started to work for a new organization, Canadian Wildlife Federation. Both organizations have great mandates. Legal Aid Ontario was really around helping Ontarians, working with all the providers within the system. The one thing I can say is that having worked at Legal Aid Ontario, it's incredible what public sector does in terms of federal, provincial, in terms of helping people, and that's something that I always cherish. With that, I was really fortunate in building technology there and evolving that system. And as well, fast forward with Canadian Wildlife Federation, we're a national organization. We've been around for 60 years, and with it, the organization helps to connect Canadians to nature, but it does operate nationally where we have conservation scientists who actually build programs related to wildlife species conservation, including coastal waters. We have 200,000 kilometers of coastal waters across around Canada, and including marine conservation. So again, it's a great honor. It's a non-profit that I work for currently, and with it, it does share the same challenges of which public sector has, and notably, as I reflect in our conversation, as to what I've seen being a CIO in my career with Legal Aid Ontario.
Okay, let's dive in and let's start. We're talking about digital services, and how do we assess when we start our digital readiness? Walk us through some principles, just to start with that.
Yes. So with digital readiness, one of the important parts, and I know for today, a lot of the conversations has been around customer experience, so that's where I'm going to focus the emphasis on digital readiness. One of the importance that I learned over the years is really a lot of times you look at how organizations operate, and just as yourselves being on the front line in terms of, say, business and technology, every so often technology is going to change, and what happens is usually it's a 4-year life cycle. So over the years, when you look at digital readiness, previous years was really about, is your infrastructure secure? Is your capacity in your data center there? Do you have the skills? And at the same time, it was very symbiotic with the business. That is, how ready is the business to use the systems? So we went through quite a few years where the readiness was always, okay, does IT have the servers? Do they have the capacity? Now, do we have the business process? Do we have the systems? So readiness is really around how you can align the technology for meeting the business needs. But the critical part of digital readiness is really, do you really understand the definition of what it is for the client? And that's the important part for digital readiness.
So that's the first principle.
Yes.
Understanding that. Any other?
Yeah, there's other principles. When it comes to, again, how you look at readiness, it's really important that, like right now, for example, in this era where we're seeing back in 2018, for example, we started to hear about this whole conversation of artificial intelligence. We started to learn about the fact that the world was saying, oh, to be in AI, you need to have data scientists. Just like we heard earlier today, organizations are realizing now that technology moves so far ahead in the last 4 years, such as earlier when the initial speaker spoke about ChatGPT in terms of the quick adoption rate. So when you look at the overall readiness, now that we're seeing such an acceleration of not only artificial intelligence, but it needs to consume data to achieve what it does. So on that part of readiness, aside from the customer, it's how do you then bring that back into your organization, especially with your executive team, and to bring it to perhaps your ADMs or your board of directors, in order for them to really understand that there's a fundamental shift happening, and without really moving forward and understanding that shift, there is an impact. And again, I always emphasize the impact is the client solution space. And I'll give one example of that just on that part. That is, so aside from the board of directors, sometimes again, when it comes to how do you validate your challenges, the one thing that I learned years ago was I was sitting with one of our CEOs, and what I would do is, as an IT executive, sitting there, really just asking the question, what are the number one concerns you have? And the one thing I learned was, at the time then our CEO was saying, I don't think we understand the client solution space. And what that meant to me was I need to understand it better. So I did get out as I say undercover, but I wasn't in my suit. I was in the courthouses back in 2012, where what we did do was I wanted to understand what's happening in the courts with our lawyers. Why were our lawyers complaining? And what I realized is that our lawyers, they didn't have the ability to connect to networks. Mm-hmm. So with that, the digital readiness was looking and seeing, we have clients here on the defense side that we need to help, and they didn't have the technology. So the first thing we did then was we decided, let's find a way to build a relationship with the courts. We implemented our own wireless infrastructure ourselves across all court locations. And then the readiness part was, well, what next, right? Well, we recognized too that although they were using their laptops when we put wireless in, they were on their laptops. And it meant that they couldn't really be as effective. So from a user experience, that led to building apps that were more responsive for tablets. And then we got into that. So the whole part is being as close to the client solution space and bringing that to your board of directors and explaining that transformation is not going to be something that's going to happen in 2 years. It's going to happen over a number of years, but knowing that the standards around security, data, and change between business and IT is going to be managed, right? And that's the important part of that readiness journey.
So that's a successful undercover mission that
Yes.
you did. Let's take a trip out of the office because you're with the Canadian Wildlife. And I want you to dive a bit into the customer aspects of where and how does these digital services enter in your current position and organization? Where do we see it?
Yeah, so thanks, Tovik. So exactly, and that happened to me, right? So undercover boss, right? So yeah, one of the things, again, I'm really fortunate about is, again, I truly believe in, it's great, like, when you look at Canada, you look at public services, helping people is critical. That's what I'm passionate about. When you look at what our mandate is with Canadian Wildlife Federation, it is about helping people, but the way we do that is we look at the environment. We look at the fact of marine life, we look at the fact of wildlife, and we look at the whole aspect of Canada nationally. So with it, I've been fortunate, for example, and I'll just give an interesting story, right? So I went to our first general meeting in the Yukon Whitehorse, and when I was there, again, I'm the type of leader where I'm like, I want to experience what it's like to use some of our applications. We actually have an application called iNaturalist, and what it does, it allows you to take photos of different types of wildlife species. And the application itself it's a real cool application where when you've done that, if there's a species or any type of animal that you don't know, could be a bug or anything, it'll actually look at it, you take a photo, and then it'll go to the network, and then it'll use an AI to actually match it and then come back with the next best reference. The whole part of that for me was I wasn't in a suit. I went up to Grey Mountain. I got clearance from one of our conservation science. I had my bear spray, but I love walking, so I went for a 3-hour trek up Grey Mountain. And in doing that, walking through the Yukon in terms of Grey Mountain, it was a very solemn walk, but I was using the application. I started to realize the whole part of being able to connect with nature, right? So the part of that was my first experience
Who did you meet?
I didn't meet a bear, but what I met was I met the beauty of Canada, right? I was right on top of Grey Mountain looking at the incredible vistas, untouched nature in the Yukon. But coming back to the conference, I was explaining back then our transformation strategy around technology, because that was the critical reason I was there. And when I arrived back, they were surprised. They said, "Oh my gosh, like we're so glad our CO didn't get eaten by a bear." And I was like, "Well,"
Back in one piece.
I go, "I didn't realize how many bears are in the woods there." But anyhow, I was okay.
The app wasn't working.
Yes.
Did you use the app?
Yes,
you
absolutely,
scan it?
yes. Yeah, with it, again, our organization has a lot of passionate people who really work on the program side, such as yourselves. Their mandate is really connecting the programs where we have scientists who actually do this day in, day out. There's gardening clubs, there's conservation awareness, including this policy making in terms of understanding what's happening across Canada, such as we have a database that maps out every river, stream, and lake, and it looks at the whole part of obstructions that really can cause issues when it comes to species and that. So with it, one of the key emphasis there is that we really have these experts. And I build the technology by listening, but on occasion too, it's important to get out and understand what's happening. And there's other stories I have around, getting out there, but I'll just sort of, keep those for in case
For
anyone
the
ever wants to learn more.
networking
Yes.
later on. The cocktail is long.
Yes.
Who comes up with these ideas? Like the membership and the gardening and the app?
Yeah, so what happens is, again, the organization has some great employees. We have employees related to our marketing and communications group. We have employees related to our we call our donor engagement, the supporters. As well, you have the whole aspect of really understanding, in terms of with the government, some of the critical things that the government is looking to resolve. And we do operate in terms of receiving grants and at the same time public fundraising. And with that, the fundraising goes to the program delivery. The important part that I've been learning is it's an evolution of when the organization says there's a challenge with technology. It's not so much as it is a technology, again, as listening to what the organization's saying and then going to the board of directors and really just having those tough discussions. And that's where we look at it, right? So it's that whole part of listening and understanding. And then the fun part is I love building and designing technology, and that's the other part, but it's really the meaning that's first.
Yeah. Do you measure the impact on customer experience, or do you adjust it according to what they say, like the survey that we just had? Do you
Yes.
meet your customers?
Yes, absolutely. So from what I've seen in terms of, again, our experts on the client, on the mandate is really looking at the whole part of receiving feedback. And that's one of the challenges is really how do you receive impact? How do you receive feedback where you can really correlate the impact? So one of the challenges that we did have was with the previous technology that we're retiring and we're moving to a modern enterprise system is really having a full view of the constituent. And with that full view, what it means is there's a whole shift that's happened in industry, okay? So the traditional CRM, customer relation database, that's really something where in the past, for example, and again, I remember legal aid, we had our data warehouse that we built out back in, say, 2010 for multidimensional view of the data. But now when you look at that back then, now it's a bit different. Now the data, just like Ahmad was mentioning earlier, the quality of the data, the currency, how current it is, that's so critical. So with it, customer data platform, it's called CDP, that right now in our organization, that's the critical part of where the organization is really looking to have not only the CRM, but a better view of every time a constituent reaches out to us, and we need to provide them some type of support, some type of feedback, some type of next best action for a program in that, and how do you measure that? So again, unification of data through customer data platform. And then the other benefit too is that in some instances where you're looking for automation, you can then look and say, well, rather than having all these different systems, you can then look to say, well, you may require some AI in terms of providing a better way, but you want to test that algorithm just to make sure that in what you're doing, that you're measuring it and you always have your business in terms of at the dashboard looking at it and giving ultimately, including myself as privacy officer, the whole aspect of really making sure meaningful consent and importantly, security and then access.
Do your customers, like us who travel, have any say in the digital products that are being implemented, developed, initiated?
Yes, yeah. So with, again, CX, it's important to have surveys. We do survey our customers. And with the surveys, it's really around understanding, what are they saying related to the organization's mission, and then taking that information and then correlating, is there any gap in terms of there's some nuances with technology. A lot of the times when I look at, again, the mandate in terms of the organization, I'm always impressed by the positive feedback that's being received. The other part of the surveying aspect of the customers on the program side is how do you evaluate a program when you really need to make sure that, for example, funding and sustainment, that you have a good set of data. And that's the other part. So the customer really sometimes is really that program manager who they need to have a real good set of data because their
Scientists?
program. Yes, data scientists.
Yeah, you shared some information, I think, about something you do with whales and the shorelines. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, certainly, yes. Yeah, so I can say that I've been in Tadoussac 2 summers ago where I've gone to see whales. In
Like
terms of just
National Geographic, your job.
No.
I love it.
Yes, but it's amazing, right? So again, just exploring and seeing, again, Canada's amazing. I'm, Canadian, and I'm proud Canadian. When you look at the biodiversity of Canada, that's where with our scientists, our data scientists are, and when I call them, like anyone with a science background using data, in my view, they're a data scientist. What that means is the tools we have today, whether someone's using ChatGPT, whether someone's using tools that are automating, if someone has a fundamental expertise, whether they're customer intake, whether they're a scientist, you look at technology and you say, well, what are you solving? So for example, before I arrived, the organization already had some initiatives where, for example, you may have heard, but in Canada there's a species called the right whale. It's a species that's been near, not that it's extinct, but the statistics were showing that due to whale strikes and net entanglement, it was creating issues. So the organization, again, our organization had built this technology called ropeless fishing gear, and what it does is it allows the fishing gear to be released into the ocean, but it doesn't have it where the lines stay up and causes entanglement. So what that does is it allows the whales to move along, and then the lobster fisher person can then remotely signal them, and then it raises them up, right? That, in my view, I saw that when I arrived, and I'm like, wow, they really have a passion for understanding the issue. Again, so in terms of the client, when you look at it, it's one is the fisheries. How do you have people have a meaningful, livelihood? The other is how do you conserve, right? Which is how do you prevent whales from getting killed? So again, that's one example.
Fascinating. Any examples less fascinating from the legal world? Sorry, anyone?
Legal, yes. So again, Legal Aid, amazing mandate. Again, with it, I would say that things that I've seen and things that we did was we started noticing around 2015 some vendors were approaching us related to generative AI. And with it, one of the things that we started to do was we started to look at, again, the solution space, right? So we have lawyers who at the time, maybe they're building out contracts or they're providing some services in a community clinic. So one of the things we started to pilot was a vendor. I don't want to name vendors in this conference, but we started to pilot a vendor's product, which was using generative AI to build legal precedents, right? But what it would do is really just give you a good sense of not replacing the lawyer, but it was helping to meet the need of what that lawyer needed for the client. That's one example. When you look at where we're at right now, again, from a technology and where technology continues, a key thing that I know on the legal side, which is really, I'd imagine with customer service is very similar. That is, we know that, people, the cell phone is here to stay. We know that back in, say, 2010, when it comes to browsers, we know that compatibility is critical. But that's the client solution space, right? Like this is the solution space. And a lot of the applications that we were starting to build and develop, it was really about making things accessible, but at the same time, really focusing on not excluding those who don't have the technology, right? So that's, again, another part of the client solution space is as we become more and more automated with AI, one of the things that was always important was to really which I reflect on, is the individual may still need the service, whether it's in person, because not everyone's going to be able to access things, right? So I sort of call it like with design, you have to have your design of the broad for the efficiencies, but you have to make sure you're not really missing everyone, right? And that's what I sort of call inclusive design. So when we build applications, we're doing things, it's that part. Fast forward to now, it's amazing, I know, with technology. And again, I keep in touch with my ex-colleagues at Legal Aid Ontario, and I'm always, a fan of what they do. And as well, like I say, it's just incredible the journey that we're on today.
Excellent. Let's open up for questions on topic, on Canada, on the wildlife. He has the answers. Yes, two here. So the mic is coming. Start.
I think my hand went up second, but I was closest to the mic. Anyways, you've talked about your role as a privacy officer. I suspect you're also involved in security. Now with AI, there are some AI governance considerations, fairness, accountability, ethics, things that come to mind. Do you have any advice or any approaches that you're using to govern, to ensure that we're governing and doing due diligence as we put out these AI tools?
Thank you for that great question. So yes, absolutely. An important part when we look at technology and privacy security is the standards still remain, that is, when it comes to acquisitions, it's still important to do the due diligence to make sure, such as data residency. Other parts really is around making sure that when you look at, say, the adoption of technology, so with AI, it is so important that if you're going to use a vendor that claims that they can do this and they're using AI, you still want to see discoverability. You still want to see clearly how that algorithm's working. We know that there's risk with bias. We know there's risk with the fact that the data itself, is it using other data? Is it being shared back? So all the same due diligence is required, and that's why I always encourage, they call it, shadow IT. For example, when people are using, for example, ChatGPT, if they're not doing it through a corporate domain and they're doing it on their own, if it's personal outside of work, that's one thing. But if you're in a corporation, you have information, and you don't have, say, an AI policy, and you don't have people trained up, then that's a risk. So another important part of that is really privacy education, right? So a lot of things, it's so important to provide employees the ability to understand, this is our privacy policy, this is what it means. It sounds basic, but everyone has to be on the same level of playing field. The other part is really establishing the governance around the data, and the governance really is important where you're still classifying. You have to have your data classifications, you have to have your management of how you're going to then test. And as I listen today to a lot of the vendors, which is great, is you're hearing the words of, the standards they're putting on the screen, they're talking about the rigor around testing, but that's a great question. And so as a CIO, it's about protecting the data. As a privacy officer, it's about making sure that the understanding of privacy, consent, understanding of how you're going to really make sure from a legal diligence that you're doing all the right things to protect the data and really communicate all the things that you need to communicate to people that have entrusted you with their data. But great question.
And we have someone here, right?
Yep. No,
This table.
all the way up.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's okay.
Sorry, I didn't have a question, just a comment, because you mentioned the cell phone's here to stay, and I don't think Zuckerberg agrees with you, because he said it's over, right? The era of the cell phone.
It's going into chips.
I don't know what the next stage
And
is,
I.
but he did mention that the era of the cell phone is over, and technology is changing so fast. I just wanted
No, that's a great perspective, and I think with everyone, absolutely, everyone has their own perspective on things. When I look at cell phones right now, say one of the key things that I think that's important for me in terms of when I look at it is where we're at right now in terms of technology. For example, and I'll give a very basic example, right? So banking, right? Authentication, convenience, it's on me, right? Absolutely over time, perhaps with compute, right? There may be different ways of compute changing, but for me, when I think of, say, currently right now, so, and again, I'll use the analogy, that is, if citizens are not being given access through mobile right now, that is a barrier to them. And so right now, this is the medium, and that's where I see it. But in the future, as things change, absolutely, it's important to look at the change. So I think that's, that's the middle ground at strike. Look at the change happening ahead of the curve. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carl.
Not to mention, the best 2 words at a dinner table to shut down an argument is Google it. Thank you, Tovid, and thank you, Carl, so much.
Thank you.